formalities of Zoom are out of the way. And Claire, how are you
I
today?
am, per our conversation, Sean, I'm exhausted at the minute,
Yes.
but I'm so delighted to be with you.
Yes, but you used a very descriptive gerund before the exhausted piece. So,
Yes.
but we will tell everybody why you are so exhausted, and it's for a very good reason. So, but I don't want to spoil the surprise yet. So just hang in there, and we'll get to it. But first of all, it has been a very long time since you and I have actually had a, as you would refer to it, a proper chat. And we'll delve into a little bit of our backgrounds together. But first, I want to thank you for doing this episode. I really appreciate it. I've been trying to get you for months, and now that I'm on your schedule, I'm going to make full use of it. And before we get to that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and welcome to Did You Know That? ? The podcast where I get to talk to interesting people about interesting and sometimes frustrating or annoying topics. And this will be all of those, depending on your point of view. Make sure if you are new to the channel, you check out the subscribe button somewhere below my finger. Make sure you hit it and hit the bell, because then you'll be notified when new content comes out. And if you are a returning guest, I thank you very much for your patronage. So my name is Sean O'Rourke, and when I am not talking to interesting people, I am a cyber liability consultant for an insurance brokerage firm in New York City. And Claire, why don't you tell the fine folks who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm Claire Poole. I'm the founder of Sport Positive Summit. We basically work, our mandate is to support the increasing action and ambition on climate change through sport, which I've been doing for quite a while now, which we'll get into. But I think it's important that people know that we actually, when I was an intern in New York, 12, 14 years ago, something wild like that, you were part of the network that I was interning with, and that's where we met.
That is very true. And now we are separated by an ocean. You are in London, correct?
Yes, back in the UK now, back in London.
Yes. And you are in London after spending 2 weeks in the northern part of the United Kingdom. So we'll get into all of that. But as you mentioned, you are the founder and grand poobah of Sport Positive Summit. And I want to get into all of this because it is really quite interesting, the approach that you've taken to climate. And we'll talk about the details on this. But I have to ask you, of all the issues in all the global world that you could have started to tackle and what have you, why climate?
So climate change is invariably the biggest issue of our time, for sure. Whilst we have manifold issues in the world at large at the moment, climate change underpins all of them. We in the UK, yourselves in the US, and globally, we're seeing the man-made issues around changing weather patterns, etc., that are leading to these periods of super hot days, like the heat dome you had in the US this summer. We're seeing flooding, we're seeing drought, we're seeing people in small island developing states, losing literally the countries they live in underneath them. And it's just such a huge issue. I think everything, whilst there's so many really important issues that need to be tackled, to me, climate change is the biggest one, because as us little human beings living on this planet, if we are causing such incredibly bad air pollution, if we are, decimating the ecosystems around us, we are going to find it very difficult to tackle any of those other problems. So to me, climate change is the biggest issue that underpins all of them. And as you said, Sean, we come at it from a different perspective to maybe other groups, in that we see the power of sport to help drive action and ambition on climate change through professional and grassroots sports organisations to firstly get their own houses in order, as we have to do to be credible and authentic. But then the long play, if you like, is once we've got our sports organisations working as effectively as possible, using this massive microphone to the world to reach fans and to reach citizens who maybe otherwise wouldn't engage on the massive emergency that we face in terms of climate change through other means, because science, culture, arts, religion, business. There's so many different sectors that are tackling this, but in my opinion, there's no sector that meets people in their hearts and minds and where they are quite like their favorite sport or their favorite athlete. So that's the way we are trying to help tackle this massive problem we're all facing.
Well, and that was one of the really intriguing parts. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because you just came from COP26, which was the United Nations meeting on climate change.
Yeah.
And they talk about it from a global perspective and countries and what have you. But what you've done is you're trying to get to the hearts and minds of individuals through what many of them basically dedicate their heart to, in some instances, even more than their family and whatnot, are their favorite teams and whatnot. And so I speak as one of those people who sometimes are in a foul mood when my team loses.
Sometimes for a week, sometimes it doesn't pass.
Sometimes it's been decades.
Exactly.
I still have, agita over certain games that I remember. So we're going to get into all that. I want to play devil's advocate with you on climate change to a certain extent on some items so that you can clarify for folks that are watching sort of why you're directed in the way you are. But first of all, you mentioned it. We met when you were an intern for a networking group back in New York City. Then you moved back home to the UK. And I think almost immediately you jumped into the climate pool. So was this, sorry, no pun intended with your last name. Was this always something that you were going to do, or did it just find you and then you've run with it?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both, to be honest. So my background, I actually studied law at university and realized very quickly when I was studying that being a lawyer was not in my future, but still, a good degree to have, fine, did that. And then kind of early 20s, did my wandering around the world, trying different things, exploring and traveling and kind of broadening my horizons in that respect. And then when I came back to London, whatever it was, 15 years ago nearly, I knew, so I've always been passionate about sport, and I've always, in my early life, it wasn't about climate change. Back then it was global warming, but also more broadly about the environment and trees and animals and being outside, being brought up in the countryside near mountains and near the sea and lakes, etc. We were always outside, and I think that's always quite intrinsic in you, I think. I mean, I'm a city girl now. I've been in, New York and London for 17, 18 years. But I think that love of the environment was always there. And then my passion about sport. But when I came back to London, it was after the 2008 crash during that. So I kind of just got a job, in terms of, it wasn't sort of beggars couldn't be choosers necessarily at the time. But that job actually was in large-scale event organisation in sort of pharmaceuticals and stuff, which I didn't love, but I learned a lot on that journey, and then moved quickly into renewable energy, which I was really interested in, and then sort of I'd always planned for that time to get into something around sustainability or climate change, but sort of went through renewable energy, and then into sustainability more broadly, and then into the sort of climate change area, and then into climate and sport. In 2014, I kind of started working at the nexus of climate and sport. And the reason that came about was that I was working for an organisation with UN Environment at the time, and we were planning a side event ahead of COP21, which was the last really big COP in Paris. And we were hosting this side event at Stade de France, so the national stadium of France. We're in hosting this event, planning this event. And I'm like, is it weird to anyone else that we're not talking about sport while we're talking about climate change and sustainability in the national sports stadium for France? And then, found some people who were doing some work and brought them together at a side event at the COP in 2015, and then realized that whilst there was great work happening, there wasn't really a global movement at that time. So then sort of used my skills from the networking side, from the events organization side, from stakeholder engagement, to try and help build this movement in Europe and more globally as well.
So then Sport Positive came to life when?
So Sport Positive in its current iteration came to life in 2018. So I had been working via other organisations and my consultancy, Clearbright at the time, to sort of support sports organisations or support other regional associations or other businesses in their efforts. And everyone kept saying to me, Claire, why aren't you doing this yourself? Why are you supporting everyone else when you should be doing your own thing? But my perspective really was, if other things are happening, like in North America, for example, the Green Sports Alliance, who do an incredible job. They're a regional association and so many of your major sports teams are a member there. And they have an annual summit. So I said, well, I don't want to duplicate on things. But I had that conversation with UNFCCC, which is the climate change arm of the United Nations. And I'd helped them launch this thing called the Sports for Climate Action Framework, which is a global set of principles that sport can sign up to. And they basically said, look, if you launch your own annual event, it will be the annual meeting place of the signatories plus anyone else who wants to attend. So I kind of thought with the summit, that's a mandate for it to be useful, and not just duplicate other efforts and make it different. And then from there, we started off at the summit, but now we do a bunch of other stuff as well. We do environmental sustainability leagues, we do data and research, we do a lot of work now with media in terms of raising awareness of what's happening and the role that sport can play, as well as supporting sports organisations with their own work in-house as well.
Yes, and so I want to let everybody know, again, down below my finger are a bunch of links for Sport Positive and for Claire, and you should check them all out. Especially, I'm very intrigued by the leagues that you have going on, and we'll get into that. Again, as everybody knows on this channel, I always have my prompt questions here, and that's one of them.
You got your notes.
Yeah, because just what I need, something else to be competitive about and what have you. This. This is a little bit different than goals. So
yeah,
you do mention sport. So for those of you who are interested in international football, not American football, that is really where you're sort of focused at the moment. So before we dive into that, who is your team?
So my team will be Liverpool.
Okay,
Football club.
good choice. And by the way, yes,
yeah,
they were champions of the EPL 2 years ago.
It's kind of I wouldn't say I'm the biggest football fan, which I know sounds counterintuitive. I'm a bit of an all sports fan.
Okay.
In that I literally watch any sport on the TV.
Oh,
I'm Irish. So
yeah.
I'm Irish, so rugby, rugby union is one of the few things we're pretty good at. So we enjoy that. Golf, don't watch that much cricket, athletics, love. So my whole family are Reds, Liverpool supporters. So I would have to say that. My husband is a Spurs fan, much more diehard than me. So we kind of, we manage that.
Okay, fair enough. And so to that end, when I think international sports, there's really two sports that I think have a global reach, in my estimation. That is football in America, soccer, and cricket. Because I don't think people realize how many people around the world play cricket. It is a massive global sport. So when you're working with these leagues, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you offering them? What is your end game for each of these engagements that you have with them?
So I would say, Sean, to your listeners, never underestimate the value of competition in absolutely anything you do. It's unbelievable. So the Sport Positive Sustainability League started off basically in 2018, where I was being interviewed a lot and I was speaking at a lot of events, and people were saying to me, Claire, who's doing the best thing? Who's the best team in the Premier League on football, for example? Soccer to you, but bear with me, I'm British, we're going to call it football.
Yes.
Read soccer every time I say football. Yeah. So I would go back to the same examples time and again, because certain football teams, I knew more about their work. I had either worked with them directly or I knew, their stadium managers personally because of the circles we mixed in, etc. And I kind of had a word with myself in 2018 and sort of said, you're going back to these examples because you know the folks there or you've heard the work, rather than actually, honestly having the data to say these are the leading teams. So what started as kind of a industry benchmarking tool, the process we go through is basically look up everything that we can find on these clubs in the public domain, present those findings to the club and say, this is what we can find on the internet, what's missing. Then they share with us any of the data on the information that they perhaps haven't publicized previously. And this is a really important point, Sean, for us in terms of the credibility of this work, is that everything we put out has come from the clubs. Like anyone can look at what's on the internet and do a ranking. But to me, misses the point entirely of our place in the industry in terms of actually getting the data from the clubs. So
Right.
work with the clubs and get all the information, and then they see the ranking ahead of time. They verify that the information we've got is as complete as they want to give us. In some instances, they're doing stuff maybe they don't want to be public yet until it's proven out. So there's, it's not a perfect science. And then we put it together in a league table. So we attribute points and we work with academics to allocate points based on the categories. We rank them and we put that out as a league table. So the reason it's a league table, and this is a really interesting area for me, because sometimes I've had conversations with clubs that maybe come a bit lower in the league, where they say, climate change is too big an issue. You shouldn't be ranking, you shouldn't be pitting us against each other like this. It's too big an issue. We should be collaborative. And I totally agree with that statement. However, if I had collated that information and put out a 45-page report on what clubs are doing, no one would have read it.
Right.
If you put out a points attributed league table, immediately people can digest that and then look in for more information. We didn't actually do it to connect with fans initially. It was more of an industry benchmarking tool. But I'd already called it a success before we published it, because a number of the clubs came back to me when they saw where they ranked and said, well, we were going to put out plant-based concessions next season anyway. We're going to bring it forward and bring them out this season instead. So can we get the point for that? So again, it drove immediate action before it even launched. And at the time, it in the end was launched by BBC Sport, and our Bundesliga version was put out by Sky Deutschland. So, very high profile tier 1 media. But at the time, I hadn't secured that and I hadn't had those conversations. I was just doing the work. So again, I knew quite a few of them, but I think it's really interesting, because I think even as an individual, in terms of this idea of tackling big issues, we can all do something. Like some people would have said, oh, I've got no place doing this. No one will really care. Give yourself reasons not to do things. But actually, because it started with me wanting to know exactly who was leading by our categories, it enabled us to find this information. BBC Sport thought it was very interesting and have published all our versions since, enabling it to get to fans, which has then drove more interest. And now the teams are coming to me saying, when's the next version going out? What are the new categories? What should we be getting across? So again, the competition between themselves, two of the clubs in the Premier League, Southampton Saints Football Club and Liverpool Football Club, both directly attribute our league in terms of where they found themselves in the first iteration to say we need to progress on this. And both of them, Liverpool launched the Red Way and Southampton launched the Halo Effect, which is their full service sustainability strategy. And they cite the league as a direct reason to why they started working on this. So for us, it started off as industry benchmarking. It's since moved into sort of fan engagement and genuine action and progress from major sporting franchises. So, thumbs up all round, really.
So I want to just to clarify for people to a certain extent. One, tables are standings. So
Correct.
in British parlance, standings are called tables. So if
Yes.
you ever look at where teams rank, they're called tables. It's also the same way in Australian football and what have you. They're called tables, but to us, they're called standings. And Bundesliga is the German soccer league, where EPL or Premier League is the English
Correct.
soccer league. But I also see that you're trying to get into La Liga, Serie A. I forget, I apologize, because I was looking at the website. I forget you had, I think, at least 2 more leagues that you were trying to work with on that front. So this is expanding globally.
Absolutely. And to be honest, Sean, the only thing that's holding us back is time and resource, to be honest, because of the way we do it and working with the clubs, you're in this dialogue with clubs. The first iteration of the Premier League and Bundesliga, which is the German elite league. Both of them took 6 months plus to do, because you have to do all the data research first and then send those to the clubs, give them a certain amount of time to respond, then verify that, put it into a table, send them that. It's an ongoing process, and the only thing that's slowing us down from expansion is the time and resource. But yeah, the other ones that we're doing is we're looking at is actually nearing completion on the French Elite League, which is Ligue 1, and the Dutch version, which is the Eredivisie. So yeah, we've started with football, but many other sports, motorsport, tennis, and others have looked at doing the same, or have asked for our help in doing the same for their sports. And we've seen a lot of sports organisations contact me afterwards, like, Claire, Poole, what have you started? Because a lot now of leagues or standings or indexes have started popping up since we did that in 2018. So, it's no bad thing. I think healthy competition and helping to drive change, it all goes in the mix.
Well, I mean, there's so many avenues I want to go down right now because of what you said. And again, as people know on this channel, the reason why I usually never get to my questions is because we end up going off on tangents. But to a certain extent, owners of these teams are not only competitive, but almost to a human. They have massive egos, and they never want to be second, or, to use your term, and I love that you use this term on your website, they don't want to be relegated.
No.
And so, again, to clarify for American audiences, in the English Premier League, if a team finishes in the bottom two, those two are basically sent down to the minor leagues, and 2 minor league teams are sent up to the majors for a season. And you never want that. You never want to be in the relegation zone.
The money is in the top leagues.
Yeah, very much so. So it looks like, maybe inadvertently, I don't know if this was your strategy, but you've tapped into just that mindset with your tables.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, for football, European football, very different to American sport, in that what makes it exciting for us as fans is that, if you don't perform, you go down, and then it becomes very, very interesting. Whereas in your leagues, obviously there's a league and everyone stays in the league no matter how they perform. So this idea of relegation or going down or being at the bottom of a league is, whilst it's negative for all sports fans, it's negative with impetus in European soccer leagues. So this idea of being towards the bottom of the league is a big driver. But also the flip is, for some of those clubs who maybe aren't smashing it on the pitch and not coming in the top 6 repeatedly, it's actually an opportunity for them to be top of a league, which is nice. It's nice. And
to the competitive point, to what you made about competition.
So Tottenham Hotspurs are the top of our Premier League version right now of the standings, your opponents. And, to the point, it's a big deal to them. Spurs, as I said, my husband's a Spurs fan, have got quite a difficult history. They haven't got loads of silverware in the cabinet. So, to even the chairman, Daniel Levy, in his chairperson's address at the start of this season, mentioned, Spurs winning our league because it means something to them, and I think that is brilliant. Although I think also, which is why sport is so excellent and so much fun, is that when we put it out that Spurs had won, their big rivals, Arsenal, basically a lot of online social media banter that they had come, below Spurs in the league because of how much polish they need for their silverware, for example, these sorts, and this is why we love sports, because you've got that. It's a really serious topic, but fans will find a way to get a dig into their rival no matter what.
They'll gamify it like anything. Yes. And by the way, just on a side note, not because of where you are located, but I have a big cup of tea right here for myself.
Nice.
So
you can't beat a cup of tea.
You've got a massive glass of water, because I am only one of 3 different podcasts or shows that you're on this afternoon.
It's a busy day, but it's fab.
Yes, it's a busy day. So that must mean that you're raking in the dough and you're making tens of millions of dollars. And this excuse of resource is because you're not willing to give up all this money that you're making. Isn't that correct?
I mean, if only it were true, Sean, I'd be absolutely delighted to show you
But
my
that's
bank
why I
balance.
wanted to bring it up, is because this is, I mean, you're not starving to death, but you're also, this is more of a passion project for you than it is something that you're going to get rich and be done with it.
100%. I mean, if anyone, a lot of people think sport and they see the organizations we work with and they think, oh, hang on. But unfortunately, as you'll find in sustainability in a lot of different sectors, whilst there's vast amounts of money in sport, it's not necessarily directed in this way to this area. At the scale it probably should be based on the challenge that we face. I do see that changing in the future because we're not going to be able to avoid it, really. I think there's a huge question around sports license to operate as we see climate impacts being more and more substantive. But yeah, the summit basically that we host covers its costs in terms of our sponsor and delegate revenue, and then there's a little bit left over to push things on in terms of, you know, supporting maybe interns to do help with our data and research gathering. And then I consult two organizations to kind of supplement that. But it's definitely not a get rich quick vibe, sure, nor will every, but also, you know, I'm not motivated by money, which is helpful when you're in an industry where there isn't loads of money. And it's, you know, it's one of those things that I think you think about a lot, especially during very busy times where you're not possibly being remunerated to the level that maybe, you know, the effort's putting in. But I don't know about you, but I ask myself the question all the time, like if I won the Euro Millions and won the lottery and had all the money in the world, would I just stop working? Absolutely not. No, like this is, I'd start a foundation, you know, I think, and that, I think that shows that you're in the right place in terms of your career, that you get enough out of it, that it isn't, I've been in that place in my career historically where it's just financially motivated, but that's not what this is by any stretch of the imagination, which is good because it would not come to fruition even if I was.
But it would help because, as you said, the data gathering to be able to expand what you want to do requires human personnel. This is not something that AI has been built for yet. So it's not like you can turn on a machine and then just let it run. You need actual human beings to find this data, authenticate it, get it to the teams. The teams then get to it whenever they can get to it. And then you have to go back and you have to do your rankings. So this is a human endeavor. Yes,
it is very much. And I think the way in the future, I think, you know, brands that want to do more in this space, I see that them getting more heavily involved. I think at the minute, in terms of, I mean, sports sponsorship is a massive area. Loads and loads to talk about around that. But even historically, if you think of sports brands that you know and love and their activations within sport, even where the sport organization's got great sustainability credentials, at the minute, they're not necessarily aligning that into their activations at sports events. We've seen a little bit more now. The Super Bowl, for example, with the aluminum cup company Ball sponsored, and at Super Bowl Miami last year, wasn't it? That, you know, 2 years ago, they had the aluminum cups and they were talking about getting rid of single-use plastic. So we're starting to see it, but it's not ubiquitous. We're not seeing that as the norm across sports. And that, I think that is a really important connection in terms of where sports are working with brands that are credible and they're doing good work in this area. Those brands need to use sports to activate that to the sports fans, and also they need to invest in the wider climate change and sustainability movement within sport to make sure that we can do the work that needs to happen, both on a data research, academia, but also the likes of the framework, the UN Sports for Climate Action framework, etc. These things need to be funded in order to support sport to do these efforts. So I think that's what we'll see more of in the future, but we aren't quite there yet, I would say.
So that point, and a point that we were obviously joking about, but you made before about the money, leads to something I wanted to talk to you about in terms of how you consult with people in terms of where they put their money and whatnot. Because one of the frustrations that I feel myself, I don't know about others, I look at when President Obama was in office and he launched a big solar initiative. And the federal government gave away, I don't know how many billions of dollars to how many solar companies. And before the end of his 8 years, almost all those companies were out of business and had done nothing. Literally nothing. Basically, they were schemes to just get the government money, throw a few solar panels up and then disappear with that money. So that's the frustration that I feel, is that so much is wasted on what I think are PR stunts. What I really liked about yours is that you were actually delving into some really solid data that existed and then bringing it to the teams for them to say, okay, what can we do better? So you mentioned you do consulting work for them.
Yeah.
When you're talking to these teams, where are you telling them that they can have the most bang for their pound or euro?
Or their book, even. We do work globally.
Whatever denomination you want.
Currency.
Yeah.
All good.
Yep.
So for us, the way it works is slightly different. So rather than, we don't necessarily advise them on the allocation of funds. What we do is to help guide them through the process with this stuff, because to your point, which is really eloquently put together, if the groundwork doesn't happen before you start allocating funds or before you start making changes, you can't manage what you don't measure. There's no point if you just start doing stuff, look, that's great, and maybe it will land and maybe there will be progress. But what we tend to do with sports organizations is start right at the beginning and say, what data have we got and where are you now? What are your carbon emissions, and where's the low hanging fruit, and where is the things we seriously need to change systemically to make a difference? So if you look at the majority of major sports in the US or globally, if we're looking at venues and stadiums, there's teams, but there's also the infrastructure that sits around that as well. So starting off to measure where they are is always the first port of call. So, how much energy are you using and who's your energy supplier? Is it from a renewable source or a fossil source? How do people travel to your games? What's their mode of transport? The majority of non-public transport venues, people will be driving. Are they carpooling? Is there, are they able to cycle, and is there bike stands there, for example? So different things like that. So energy, transport, food, we know basically at an individual and an organization level account for about 70 to 80% of our emissions. So if you can reduce your emissions around energy, transport and food, then you're on a really good path. Again, food's a difficult one, because food is a very emotional topic for people, especially around sport, because they want certain foods because they think about that sport when they think about food.
Right.
The hot dog in US sports,
I was about to say, you can't touch my hot dog. Sorry.
I'll take the hot dog away. What you can do is give people options if they want to try something. So plant-based options, lower carbon options, etc. So at this stage, it's about providing options rather than trying to take stuff away from people. But energy, transport, food are the big ones. Then things like waste, in terms of where does your waste go? Colleagues of mine who did an index recently highlighted that, I think across 40 or 50 US stadiums that they did a survey with, of them, something like 60% of their waste is going to landfill. Can you imagine the amount of waste across a season that a stadium is churning out? Whereas here in the UK or Europe, pretty much nothing goes to landfill anymore. It's either recycled, or it goes into anaerobic digestion, or it goes into incineration to create fuel for energy to power local homes, etc. So geographically, things differ quite a lot. But also things like water efficiency. Water stress is one of the biggest issues that we will face as well. And again, as I mentioned, this idea of sport having a license to operate in the future, how can you irrigate a football pitch when people haven't got enough drinking water? Right. Exactly. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to be allowed to happen. So therefore, sport, if things carry on and we have these water stresses, these droughts, these issues, either sport has to change its model, which again causes other issues, moving to AstroTurf or plastic turf instead, going to change the game. Imagine baseball on AstroTurf.
Well, we did have that and what have you, and they went away from it because it was so terrible.
And the microplastics.
Yeah.
A huge issue with microplastics. But if irrigated fields aren't an option anymore. These are the issues we're going to be faced with. So, I mean, we're looking pretty far into the future, but still in our lifetime, potentially, or our kids' lifetime. So all of these, in terms of what the way we work with clients, is kind of to work out, first of all, what their impact is. That's the number one big thing, because it changes dramatically. Even if you're a football club in the UK working in the same league, you know, as another football club, one venue might be a public transport venue, the other one might be in the middle of nowhere, so their fan travel emissions are much bigger, etc. So you can never guess what your emissions are based on other people or other organizations. So starting off with that benchmark, and then looking methodically at phase one, you know, what can we do, the low-hanging fruit? How can we reduce this as much as possible without much change, really? And then where can we go from there? How can we work with partners? How can we work at a more sort of strategic and systemic kind of level to make changes that are going to impact the bigger picture stuff? So it's a process, but again, you know, for your listeners, even if they're not in sport or whether they are, it serves all of us to know what our impact is, whether it's us or our businesses, to make changes that actually reduce that, rather than just what we think it'll probably help.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into actually one of the questions that I had down, is that how do you translate all this to the everyday person? And sorry, I was being a little cute when I wrote this, because I wrote the question out because I wanted to be clever and whatnot. But essentially, I was going to say, if I took you down to Piccadilly Circus and had you stop and talk to 50 everyday people just walking through there, whether they're locals, tourists, or what have you, how are you translating this message to them so that because if 8 billion people on this planet did something small every day, that would be a massive impact. And I think that's part of the problem is that we always talk about global changes when if you and I just did something, well, that's better than you and I not doing something. And if we can do that every day, it makes an impact.
Absolutely. I think taking personal responsibility is brilliant, and I can talk to you for sure about how we can all do that and how we can think about that. But I also think it's important, which is a big part of this as well, is that it is not just the individual's responsibility to drive this change. Governments have to drive this change. Business, the organizations that control the way we live and the way we work and what's subsidized and what's not, that big stuff has to happen. And I think you're probably well aware of BP, British Petroleum's campaign about, you know, capturing your own, what's your carbon footprint, etc. For a multinational oil company to do a huge campaign and try and get us to take responsibility for our impact is very clever marketing, but it is slightly moving the issue. So all of us, I'm not saying that we don't.
We call it hypocritical. So
yeah, it's clever marketing, very hypocritical.
Right.
But that's not to say we as individuals have got the power. And I think the power that we've got is massive. And I think the power that we've got falls in two sort of buckets for me. The power to make changes in our own life is massive. So if you as an individual can make small changes that don't necessarily affect you, and again, I'm sure it varies dramatically from country to country and state to state in the US, for example. But if I speak in terms of us here in the UK, it's very, very easy to change your energy tariff of your gas and electricity onto renewable energy in terms of offshore wind or solar. So it's not more expensive, it's not difficult to do, you just have to choose a green tariff. So again, you can make changes like that. I don't know how easy that is to do in the US, for example.
Not very
easy. Here in Europe, very easy to do. So yeah, the point that's being made is some people think, oh, well, you know, I haven't got the money and the time and the resources to put a solar panel on my roof, or I live in an apartment and I don't have a roof. So what are you talking to me about here? It's not necessarily about that, but if you can make small changes where you see an impact, then that's brilliant. Somewhere like New York City, hardly anyone's got a car. So you're using public transport all the time. So already that's a much lower emitting way to travel than having your own car that maybe people in the Midwest who have their huge, you know, the huge trucks that run on huge amount of gas or whatever and pumping out emissions. So everywhere you are, you've got a slightly different situation. But essentially, if things that are good for the environment tend to be on an individual level pretty okay on the pocket in terms of finances, and usually quite good for your local community as well. So if you're buying food, looking that it's locally or as locally as possible sourced, knowing where it's traveled from, trying to buy food that's in season as opposed to something that's out of season and therefore been shipped halfway across the world, having more plant-based products as opposed to high carbon foods like beef, pork, etc. Those small changes you can make in your own life. A lot of people, I would say, possibly in the US, are very against a lot of these things because especially around food, because it's a very emotional topic. And I think one thing in the US that I think is very admirable is that the US farming system wants to allow everyone to be able to afford meat products, for example, but they're a high source of protein and they want that to be available at a price that's affordable. But also we know that you can get similar levels of protein from plant-based foods. So in the UK at the minute, they're doing a campaign where even if you can't come off meat entirely, if you're making like a spaghetti bolognese or something, can you do half meat, half lentils, or can you reduce it? So you're not getting rid of it, but you are incorporating more plant-based. It is good for your health and it is good for the environment as well, and it's a lot cheaper usually. So there's things like that we can do in our own lives. Go on, do you want me to do the second bit, or have you got thoughts?
No, do the second bit, because then this will go into my devil's advocate section, because I do want to ask you a couple questions on that.
Perfect.
So what's the second part?
So the second part is using our voice to drive change. And this is something that it's an individual level, but it's about using your platform as an individual, which we see a lot of people using their voice around who we vote into office, bills that we are against, etc. Calling your local congressperson to leave a message, to say you are against something, and using your voice to be able to drive change. You can use your voice not necessarily to stop things happening, but also to start things happening as well. So if you care about the environment, you care about sustainability, care about climate change in a sport context, talking to, tweeting, emailing, messaging your sports organization, your team, athletes that you're asking them what they're doing on this stuff, not knowing all the answers, just literally asking the question. I know from my work that filters through to people inside the organization, because a lot of the time this work, it's not easy work to do necessarily, but there's usually a lot of people inside every organization that want this to happen, but it's just not easy perhaps to get buy-in from management, or it's not because if fans don't care about it, it's not the priority. So if you can use your voice to make people within those organizations aware that you do care about it, and as a fan it is important to you, even though you feel as though, well, I wouldn't hear back from them and they wouldn't really care, I promise you that is going through to people in the know in sports organizations, and they use that information to say, this needs to be on our agenda, we need to be across this because the fans are demanding it. So changing efforts in our own life, important to do what we can, but I think possibly more importantly, using your voice to get organizational change on a mass level from organizations that have big reach and can make changes that will affect millions and millions of people rather than just one.
I want to add something to your voice, because I always think it is stronger sometimes than the voice, is your pocketbook.
Yeah.
Because if you stop buying from people who aren't in alignment with your goals, which we've seen to a certain extent, and I don't equate it to cancel culture. That's not what I equate it to. What I equate it is that, look, your money and your time are limited resources. So if you want to direct it towards those that you think are doing things that you think are right or proper, that has could have a massive impact. Again, if here in the States, 200 million adults stopped buying from McDonald's because they said, hey, you're doing something we don't like, McDonald's would listen immediately.
Absolutely. I think to build on your point, vote with your feet and put your feet somewhere else and different, but tell the organizations you're leaving why you're leaving. We want it just to be a blip in terms of, oh, maybe our campaign wasn't as good as last year. They need to know that you're leaving because you're not happy with them. So 100% agree with that. Vote with your feet and take your money elsewhere, but definitely let them know.
And it can't be a churlish reason. You can't do it because you took the McRib away or what have you. You need the McDonald's is not going to care. But if you tell them you don't like their impact on the environment or the economy, they care about that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So a couple devil's advocacy, and this is not because I want to poke the bear or what have you, but these are thoughts that I've had, arguments that I've heard made elsewhere. And I think you coming from COP26, it's a good time to have the same discussion, because we had these same discussions after Paris and what have you. So world's been around for a long time, according to geologists and whatnot. We've been through massive climate changes events. I mean, our ancestors survived the last ice age 40,000 years ago. Granted, there weren't 7+ billion of us back then, but why is this different?
This is different because if you don't take my word for it, take our word, the words of 99% of scientists globally that agree that what we're seeing in terms of climate change and weather patterns is man-made. It's because of the industrial revolutions that we've all been through. It's because we are digging up coal and oil from the Earth's core and burning that and putting emissions into the air, which is affecting the atmosphere around the Earth and how our seasons work and how basically we live because of that. So, you know, I read a lot about this stuff. I know a lot about this stuff. I'm not a climate scientist, but I would not go against 99% of scientists who do agree on this. So in that case, it kind of feels as though there's the climate deniers or people who don't necessarily believe in climate change are still out there. But certainly I think broadly and globally, we've moved past that conversation now in terms of this is just another one of the way the Earth is working. In all of those previous ages, a lot of things were made extinct. So again, do you want to take a chance, or do you want to just make some small changes to your own lifestyle and maybe have your grandkids be around, you know?
I don't know. I like blackjack. So, you know, hey, maybe it comes up. Maybe I get a blackjack. Maybe the dealer does. But to that end, so are we reacting this way because we're causing it or because we think we can fix it? Because if this was a natural occurring event, so let's say glaciers, mile deep glaciers were starting to creep down toward New York City, people would be freaking out. But I mean, there'd be very little that technologically we could do at the moment. But do you think the world is reacting like this because we can do something about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the question is basically, are we
like, if this was natural, would we be reacting the same way?
Yeah. Well, I think we would, in terms of the impacts. If it was a natural phenomenon, I guess. So basically, the climate change movement moves in is two sides, isn't it? It's adaptation in terms of how we're adapting, so sort of resilience side and adapting, or trying to change things for the better. So instead of adapting, how can we make things different in the future? So I think if it was agreed that it was a natural phenomenon, we'd still have to deal with the fallout. We would just have to adapt to that climate and technology innovation and so forth. However, what we know is that we are causing it. So therefore, if we can change our behaviors, we can actually stop this before it gets too bad, as opposed to agreeing that it's a natural phenomenon and thinking fatalistically, this is the way we're going. But we now have to work together to adapt to that new norm. So I think the question that you've got there is around human beings looking to control things. And I think, you know, what's fascinating about that is we know this is happening. We know what's coming. The scientists are pretty unequivocal about what's happening. I think one of the scariest things about climate change is that it's moving too fast for us to be tackling in any substantive way yet, but it's moving too slow for people to get their head around on a day-to-day level. We have these events that happen, and then people adapt to that in the moment, and they think, isn't this awful, climate change? And then it goes away and we get back to normal, because human beings are very short-term focused. If it's not right in front of us right now, we're not really stressed about it. So I think that's the biggest challenge of climate change in terms of how close it is to us and how it affects us on a day-to-day basis. But actually, when I was at the COP, just as a sort of side note, add on to that, we were having this sort of conversation, which one of the COP partners had organized. There's about 16 or 17 of us at a dinner, and we were having kind of a salon sort of conversation. And one of the comments that really made me think and reflect on afterwards, and this isn't necessarily mind-blowing, but I just thought, I've never thought about it like that. The guy who was talking said, isn't it fascinating that human beings are terrified of change, but obsessed with innovation? And I thought, isn't that fact? Like, we're on a day-to-day level, there's nothing we like more than routine and knowing what's going to happen and feeling in control. We absolutely hate change, but all of us are obsessed with innovation, which is just a fancy name for change. So this, again, with climate change and the issues that are there, we need this innovation to stop this change.
Right.
Actually, we're still craving, we're still worried about the change happening, but we're not doing enough about it yet to fix it.
Right. But so again, this is great, because now we're off on a tangent on not only the English language and definitions and what have you, but humans, I think, look at innovation and things that make my life better.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody, despite all the warnings and despite everything that is going on, sees the changes that you're asking them to make, both from a grand level, government-based, corporate-based level, all the way down to what I do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
They don't see that as innovation. They see that as, well, you're asking me to change my life. You're asking me to do something that's annoying, that I have to think about. Because you mentioned this too. You mentioned how not much of what comes out of a stadium in the UK goes to a landfill versus the United States. And I have to believe one of that reasons is because the fan base there knows where to put things so that they don't get contaminated, they don't get mixed up, so that you're not sending potentially dangerous plastic to an incinerator. And then you ruin that delivery because there's too much plastic in there and we can't burn that, or else we're going to kill everybody with the smoke emission.
I mean, I think there's possibly an infrastructure issue in terms of getting that waste out of there and getting it recycled or getting it into somewhere valuable. It might be, a lack of demand for that. It's just the way it's always been, and the demand hasn't changed for that. But I do know in the US it is slightly different. Even the organizations, sports arenas that are doing stuff around this. In the UK and Europe, we're obsessed with bins, with trash cans of different, recycling for paper, plastic, glass, general waste. In the US, in sport, much more pragmatic. A good friend of mine, Norman Voschulter, who's the director of fan experience at the Philadelphia Eagles Stadium, he's like, try getting 90,000 Philly fans to sort their recycling after the end of a losing match.
That's my birthplace, so I know exactly what he's talking about.
You know. So wonderful people, very, very passionate fans who enjoy a drink, much like the Irish. There's absolutely no derogatory statements here. It's just, this is fact. They're very passionate fans. They enjoy the game. You're not gonna, so his perspective is, it gets sorted behind the scenes. Everyone just puts everything in a trash can, then they work very diligently with their teams behind the scenes to sort it, and then it gets recycled and goes out in different ways. And they are actually very far ahead with some of this stuff. They recycle the aluminum cans and stuff, and savvy. They capture it, they bale it, and they wait for the aluminum prices to go up before they cash it in. So, stuff like that. Again, innovative ideas to do the right thing and also make it work for you there. So I think there's a lot of issues. There isn't one reason why you could say these things don't happen. And it's certainly not to say like the UK or Europe is ahead in these ways, because they're much further behind in other areas. And, it's not about that. It's just different infrastructure, different priorities, and maybe having worked on it for slightly longer or being slightly more engendered to do so.
But I also think down deep, it's just, to your point, getting 90,000 Philly fans to parse trash, food, recyclables. I mean, when you come out, if the Eagles have just lost by a last second field goal, like they did a couple of weeks ago, and my stepfather was there and he was crushed, him walking out with his brother, the last thing they're thinking about is, oh, the stuff in my hand, one has to go there, one has to go there.
Must recycle.
Yeah, no, that's not what they're thinking about. And so I think a lot of it, to your point, you can do the small stuff that makes a big difference. You just have to do it on a consistent basis. And by the way, Lincoln Financial Field, I mean, they have windmills on there. I believe they have solar panels up top. I mean, they did a lot to try to
So
reduce their footprint.
Yeah,
per se.
here's one thing that they did, which is incredible, because I know the guys over there really well. How to get Philly fans interested in biodiversity: send them seedlings from Lincoln Field. So, you know, season ticket holders or whatever got a little packet with seeds in, or a small bit of turf to put in their back garden, or you know, their yard or whatever it was, with some information about how important, you know, biodiversity is to our ecosystem. Do the majority of Philly fans care about ecological biodiversity? Maybe not. Are they going to take a piece of Lincoln Field and treasure that? Yes, they are. And maybe they'll read what came with it. So again, it's about sport and climate change is about knowing who you're talking to, meeting them where they are and engaging them in a way they care about, not preaching, not making them do something that's difficult, but trying to bring them along in a fun, engaging way that they find exciting and interesting. Okay,
so we've hit just about an hour. I'm going to leave it there because I do have, again, I didn't get to all the questions, and I do have a lot more that I want to talk to you about, but I do know you have another interview after this because you are a quite popular individual for a lot of reasons.
We have 10 more minutes if you want to do another couple.
Nope, I want your voice to relax and what have you, but I wanted to close it off. So give me what you want to accomplish from Sport Positive in 2022, and then what you're hoping your organization looks like at the beginning of 2025.
So next year, 2022, we're really focused on moving from sort of commitments into action. So we've had a lot of organizations make commitments around climate change in terms of reduction of emissions, etc., globally. And what we really want to do is, whilst continue to support those commitments and the expansion of those, make sure that those organizations that have made these commitments are truly driving action in their organizations, and that action is being covered by the media. We really want this movement to grow. We know it is not an insubstantial challenge for organizations to take on, but sort of next year, our big remit really is action. How can we stop talking as much, as she says, in the midst of 3 speaking engagements, and get into the action portion? Do you know what I mean? And kind of making sure that sports organizations are going beyond the press releases and the information that they've put out, and are now showing the world their plans and their strategies, and how they're going to make those change, and how they're going to bring fans along with them. And then 2025, you know, a further trajectory, I think, for us in terms of an organization, we want to have got to a stage with the development of this that we are bigger, that we've got more people with us supporting the effort and allowing us to do more, and as well getting more. My longer term goal is getting more data and information out, guides, making it easy, open source information, so as teams and clubs, leagues, federations, etc., get around this, trying to reduce as many barriers as possible to them being able to do work by putting together guides, best practices, creating networks so they can share that information, etc. So we really want to be at a stage where we can truly say, you know, the majority of sport is behind this, and that genuine and substantive change is happening. So that's kind of the mid to long term goal. Okay.
And then final question, do you trash talk Henry Cavill when Ireland and England play in rugby? Okay, through Instagram, because I do know he's a huge English rugby fan. So
yes, well, as the last game that we went to before everything got shut down with COVID was Ireland-England at Twickenham, where Ireland lost in spectacular fashion. So I was not happy with not being able to go back to any more sport. But, you know, Ireland took New Zealand over the weekend. So maybe
I saw that.
On track. Maybe we're back on track.
That was, I have to admit, I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
That was a shocking result.
I mean, Ireland are brilliant. We just had a bit of a downtime with Rory retiring, etc. You know, we've gone through a little bit of a lull, but now it looks like we're back on track.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you could take New Zealand, I mean, that's no small feat. Now you got to back it up. Yeah, one's an accident, two's the start of a trend. So let's see what happens in their next match.
The look of the Irish is back.
Yes. And Liverpool's looking good. I mean, I pull
Strong.
for Liverpool. I don't pull for any really one team in EPL because I just love watching the games.
Yeah.
Much different from MLS here in the States. But I do have a fondness of Liverpool simply because of the Beatles. So, you know.
Yeah, it'll be a sad day when Jurgen Klopp leaves, that is for sure.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. So, and as long as you have Salah,
Hopefully the one after.
Yeah, as long as you have Salah, you've always got a chance. The
We're
guy
golden.
is spectacular to watch. Love watching him play.
Absolutely.
This was fantastic. Hopefully, if you're ever down in Philly, you got to let me know because I'm always up for going to a game down there.
Definitely.
And then you can give me a tour of what everything the link has got going on and whatnot behind the scenes. But I really do appreciate this. I really have been after you for months on this, and I felt kind of like a stalker. But I'm glad I finally got you on. I congratulate you on great success, and I certainly hope that everything that you're working toward, everybody takes to heart and starts doing just the small stuff each day. Even if it's just proper recycling. That, believe it or not, that helps huge, especially in urban areas like New York City and London and whatnot.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's no slight on your part, because it's just unbelievably hectic time.
Well, when the UN calls and says, hey, we have a 2-week window for you to come and spread your message. Well, you know what? I can wait. I'm okay with that.
It's a pleasure, and so lovely to reconnect as well.
Yes, and hopefully we can do so in person at one point.
Yes, fingers crossed over to the US next year, so I'll let you know.
Oh, hell, I'll come your way. I haven't been to London in like, I don't know, 6 years at this point. So I'm happy to come your way.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Not a problem. Thanks, Claire, for coming in. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. You've been watching Did You Know That? ? The channel where I talk to interesting people about interesting and sometimes annoying topics, of which I promised you this was going to be one of those. But take to heart what Claire has put forward. You can do your part. I'm not lecturing you. I'm just letting you know it's a reality. You can actually do your part without making too big of a change. And even though she does want you to try plant-based, you don't have to give up meat altogether. I certainly have not. So, and probably will not be doing so. Remember, there is a subscribe button somewhere below my finger with the bell. There is also in the video notes or episode notes, there are the links to Claire's different websites and social media profiles. Be sure to check her out, give her a follow, give her some support. And if you've got ideas, if you've got insights, if you've got inside info on what stadiums are doing around the world, be sure to send it her way. She'll be more than happy to take it on. Well, I don't know if she'll be more than happy to take it on, but I mean, she might have the time to take it on.
Very happy to be here.
Yes, exactly. So Claire, until next time, you be well, and everybody out.